Hello and welcome to all of our Padawan learners out there. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
And if you're here, you've probably suffered through the first chapter of, probably in my opinion, our worst writing ever that I've ever done. Like, it was terrible and atrocious. But the overall idea was that Obi-Wan and Celia would get together and they would have a surprise child. And this child was not meant to supplant Anakin Skywalker's role as main character in the Clone Wars, but rather to accentuate Anakin's role and push Anakin forward, prodding him forward, as essentially Talon would be Anakin's sidekick in a way, looking up to him and hero worshipping him, and hero worshipping Obi-Wan. But he was to be a markedly different creature. Anakin is a much more brooding character at his core, especially by the time of Episode 3. Talon was meant to be, to an extent, a much more cheerful and optimistic character, but in time he also adopted a brooding mien and whatnot. And he was going to have a particular fate, so to speak, in store for him after Order 66. Anyways, we'll continue this story, but the difference is Dan will be doing the narration this time, just to shake things up, and I'll just read the opening thing of Chapter 1, Childhood.
Given over, Talon bothered the nurse droids and those involved in the nursery with his constant screams. A noisy child, he would learn to scream before walking. However, once he did discover how to walk, he favored a swift jaunt over a slow one. And why wouldn't he?
And why shouldn't he?
Why shouldn't he? Walking slowly was for those unwilling to pledge themselves to adventure, to curiosity. Such as discovering where the Muja fruits came from, the droids tended to bring them. To discover where the nannies left for.
That boy is trouble. I'll be doing all the droids. One of the droids
complained plaintively to Sukitachi when she inquired after him upon her return to the temple from her infiltration mission that had kept her preoccupied on the Outer Rim.
He screams first, eats second, and tries to consistently escape every chance he gets. That child has no discipline, and when we tried to assign him to a certain clan, this being a sub-Jedi clan thing, which is part of the nursery thing, and group of classrooms. It's how the Jedi generally divided the infants, it seems. As is proper, he wandered from group to group, whining incessantly.
This complaint, amongst many others, would greatly amuse Obi-Wan to Silly's irritation, as she worried about how much of a ruckus young Talon was causing.
Okay, so I guess I'll be doing I guess it's Obi-Wan here.
He gets this from you, he told her one night after they had snuck out of the temple for a mixed night together and mission in the lower parts of Galactic City.
Silly huffed next to him. I doubt it. You're the one always getting into trouble. Or on missions where you get separated from Jinn, or from a communicator.
Separated from Qui-Gon or from a communicator? What do you mean it always happens?
You're doing that thing where you repeat everything I say, except in a higher-pitched voice.
Silly grumbled privately. She liked this one quirk, but not at the moment. I do not screech in a high-pitched tone.
Yet you don't deny repeating what others say.
No matter. Talon will be fine. If he's anything like you, he's liable to swiftly learn to bully his way out of trouble, Obi-Wan retorted wryly, reminiscing about their younger years and how much they had clashed at the time. We have spice smugglers to root out in the lower city.
Two. This is because each part was divided into different years of Talon's life. One was his first year. 2 was his second year of life.
It had been some time since the 2-year-old Talon had been let out from the nursery he shared with the hundreds of other younglings, not that it meant he had gotten his own room. If anything, it simply meant his group of quartermates had shrunk to a smaller number. His was a privileged life, like some of the other younglings, yet unlike some who received the odd visit, which would stop when they turned 3 standard Republican years. His family, while it had originated on Coruscant, didn't visit him. This didn't bother him. He honestly cared more about getting another slice of muja fruit or cake and keeping his fellow younglings near him. Soon enough, though, shortly after his second name day, he was removed from the nursery and put into particular classes just as the other 2 or 3-year-olds were. In the process prior to this, to determine where he should go, which clan to organize him in, and who should be his instructor, the first marked event of his life occurred. A midichlorian inspection occurred.
Okay, that sentence was a little awkward and clunky.
Yeah. Having been handed over for Jedi training, as a baby due to his force sensitivity that nobody could deny given how strongly they felt it in him. None had bothered to do the checkup as he was healthy, and many guessed or assumed, like with most children, where his level of midichlorians were at. Not to mention, Suki had done it herself.
Better. Oh yeah, had done it herself. Yeah.
Had done it herself when he was picked up, without directly informing her master of how high it was. Once it was found out how high they were, the droids duly reported it to several of the wizened old masters responsible, for it was more than a little shocked. Swiftly they reported it to their superior in confusion. Then he reported it to his superior, who reported to one of the administrative councils, who passed it along to Mace Windu, who duly let Yoda know after it had been passed along over the course of several days.
Now, here, when it comes to the midichlorian count number, we had decided that it was just shy of 20,000. Real quick. Not to usurp Anakin's role, but it's closer to Mace Windu's midichlorian count, which was around 19,981, I think, or thereabouts, or 91. Mace had the highest midichlorian count. That's just a piece of lore. And Talon was going to be right a little shy of Mace Windu's potential as a baby. Now, Anakin was undeniably going to have a much higher midichlorian count, reaching 23,000 midichlorians by the time of episode 3. Talon was not going to be near that high at all. He would grow a little higher, but he would not reach the Anakin levels. Just to reassure everyone, we did not want to supplant Anakin as a main character. We just wanted to offer a different viewpoint on him.
Preoccupied with other duties, Yoda let the task of inspecting the nearly 20,000 midichlorian.
The
actual number fell short of that number by a mere 9 midichlorians. Counted the child's inspection fall.
Okay, the sentence is weird. Fell upon the revered master Yaddle,
who hurried down after assigning her most recent Padawan learner several more assignments.
Okay, that sentence was also weird. You know what? How about you do Yoda, I'll do Yaddle.
Okay.
See this miracle I wish, she quietly informed one of the nanny droid. Oh, shoot. Yeah, sorry.
She quietly informed one of the nanny droids, who politely informed her of where to find a child.
The initiate is preoccupied as always with his laser ball.
The droid replied uncomfortably.
Wrong, is it?
Yaddle questioned in confusion as she hobbled after the droid. No longer a young Jedi, she shared not just race, ethnicity, and wisdom to Yoda, but also the effects of having grown to be too old for the rapid pace of the tall droids and humanoids working in the nursery.
Not at all. It is never wrong for a child to enjoy themselves.
The droid hurriedly responded, obviously worried that he had said something wrong.
It is just that Initiate Kenobi can get aggressive at times with his ball. Kenobi?
Yaddle wondered, her ears fluttering sideways a little in surprise. As it wasn't a particularly common surname, even though it was supposed to be originally from Coruscant.
Yes, Initiate Talon Kenobi, the droid
The droid replied, not catching on to her curiosity or surprise, as it was not familiar with the famous Padawan learner, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had long since left the nursery and now favored by the council.
And was now favored
by the council. Hobbling into the nursery, she was suddenly shoved to the ground with an oomph as the air bled from her lungs, from being all but thrown aside by one of the non-force sensitive nannies who screeched,
"Get down!"
All because a laser ball, a toy for force sensitive children, suddenly whizzed by with the force of a battering ram, smashing through a minor vase and into the mouth of a statue of the revered ancient Jedi Master, Atton Rand.
And, okay, so who should do Talon's voice?
I don't know.
You want me to?
You are already doing Yaddle.
And the droids, and Qui-Gon, and Celie.
Okay. Criff! Swore one of the children as he shouted to a nearby child.
Who did this?
Screeched the panicked droid, which Yaddle once she had picked herself up, having nearly taken the ball to the head before it rose slightly higher to land in said statue, wondered if the droid could explode from sheer outrage.
No, now it's Talon.
He did it!
Sorry. The dog is... Yeah, the dog's being a nuisance. He did it.
He did it! A young light-browned, almost blonde-haired, blue-eyed little child declared, pointing at the Togrutan youngling next to him, who let out a huff of anger.
No!
And he punched the other child in the arm, as the other avoided a second blow by leaping back and hiding behind one of the Wookiee younglings, who retaliated with a wounded look at him and an innocent look in the nanny and droid's direction. Master, he hurt me, he shouted in pain, pointing at the other child.
Children, behave! What will the High Council think when they find you all behaving like demons again?
The droid scolded, outraged that they would dare behave in such a manner before one of the most revered masters in the Order.
Energetic and in need of candy, these younglings are.
Yaddle remarked amusedly.
Now, Yaddle, real quick, in the Jedi Quest series was the most grandmotherly creature in the galaxy. Real quick. Who actually sacrifices herself to die horribly for Anakin to protect him from Grant Omega.
Yaddle remarked amusedly. Fond of children by nature, she could see that they were, yes, little firebrands, but all such children tended to misbehave at some point. Yet for later...
Oh, wait, it's me who's supposed to read this. Yet for later that will be. For now, speak to Kenobi I will. Nya, 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 nya.
Blah.
No, it's blah.
Blah. Two of the younglings stuck their tongues out at the smaller child, who grumbled and red-faced stepped forward as though walking to his execution. Yaddle inspected the child closely. In some ways he reminded her more of Bruk-Chun or Sikitachi at the age of 2 than of Obi-Wan Kenobi. In that he seemed to be a troublemaker, yet it was called the Terrible Tooth for a reason, she believed, with a fond sigh. In the Force, though she could feel him, he surged. He filled a chunk of the room already. It was a powerful... His was a powerful destiny that, she believed, she knew instinctively, and yet as he stared at her in confusion, he had yet to realize what he was, how soon his name and his genetics would set him apart even in the temple. Like with all other such younglings, Yaddle felt a surge of grief at the thought that this child would change, lose his innocence, possibly his life in time. It made her wish to lock him up forever in the nursery to protect him, yet she could not do this. It was unnatural. Yes, master? He asked, serious. He asked nervously, clearly under the impression he had done something wrong. The wizened old Jedi placed one three-fingered green hand on his head and smiled at him with sincere affection.
Small though you are, soon grand you shall be. Rise from here to the heights of the order you will, though perhaps in the future, curse in the likeness of a pirate you will not.
Yes, master, he said meekly, aware of his mistake, though. He tried to defend himself. But I didn't...
A Jedi never lies.
Yaddle sharply corrected him, which earned her a nod and a hung head.
Though never better did Master Rand ever look. Perhaps when next visit I shall, you will have adjusted your aim with a laser ball.
She knew she shouldn't encourage him, but why not? What was the harm in smashing a few statues, which would simply create jobs with their destruction and need to be rebuilt?
Wow, I love the logic here of Yaddle. It's like, it's creating jobs. Isn't that good?
Turning to go, she watched him long and hard for a moment before she turned to the droid next to her.
Any relation to Padawan Kenobi, is he? Cousin, perhaps? Brother, perhaps?
The droid took a moment to access its archive files built into it. Accessing the DNA and filial records of all Jedi, unaware just as Yaddle was of the changes done to them by Sith and Obi-Wan, replying a moment later as both Yaddle and it remained completely ignorant of the subterfuge done to them.
He is the son of Obi-Wan Kenobi's older brother, Owen, who moved to the planet of Prologue approximately 8 years ago with his family, and is now working as a manager for a mechanic's shop. Ah, fascinating, the line of Kenobi's... Wow, this line is terribly written. Ah, fascinating is the line of the Kenobis are.
Yaddle remarked, fascinated, part of her mind wandering to the older Kenobi she knew, as she pushed the issue from her mind and moved to go report to Yoda and Mace about this. Part of her mind also thought of an ancient prophecy, one that predicted a perfect force being who would bring balance in time. She had never seen such a high midichlorian count in one so young. Was it possible he was this being? It would be some years before this thought would be banished from her mind, this consideration forgotten, particularly after a certain former slave was brought to the order by the revered Master Jin. Yet never would she forget of this meeting.
Forget this meeting. I don't know where you got the of.
Yet never would she forget this meeting, particularly the use of vulgarities and the insult done to the ancient Master Rand.
Yeah. 3.
Did Talon excel? Where other younglings struggled or found themselves clumsy, the first time they felt the hilt of the training blade in their hands, Talon was different. The blue blaze of energy lit up before him, and he gaped at it. It felt perfect, right in his hands.
You could do Yoda.
Eager to swallow whales, are we, young Kenobi? How embarrassing.
How embarrassing.
Yoda chided him in quiet amusement as he grinned at the child.
I think that scene was meant as a nod to episode 2 of How embarrassing, as he mocks Obi-Wan Kenobi. A pretty much 40-year-old Obi-Wan. I just thought that scene was hilarious. I still do.
It was Yoda's saber class, the first for the young children of 3, and one that, after their initial days filled with lessons about literacy, several different languages, and some minor fairy tales or myths. Thus, for them, it was a big day. Unaware, the children didn't notice the adults who had gathered to observe them, curious to scout out their future Padawans. From a higher floor, as they observed the 50 to 60 gathered children behind a glass window, which to any outside observe was a dull observer was a dull sheen of gray, just as the rest of the wall was, save for the lower part, which, like the rest of the circular room, was a light shade of brown and reddish brown. What is so special about this blade? First thing you must know about it, Yoda asked him, eager for the answer, as in all his 800 years of life, he had always received a different answer each time. Don't stab your foot! Don't stab your foot! Blurted out Talon as he observed
Gurion,
a Wookiee youngling his age, nearly do the same, and scowl at the offending green blade in his hand. This response, which had been delivered without thought, gave Yoda pause. It caused a huge ruckus of laughter amongst the observers, with Obi-Wan observing from where he stood behind between Bant, Aaron, and Siri. Couldn't keep from laughing himself.
Don't laugh, Obi-Wan. It's his first time, so he scolded protectively, even as she restrained her own snorts of laughter.
Have some sensitivity, his confidant advised him.
As gentle as always.
Okay,
right there, I think that's Bant, who's supposed to be speaking. So you'll be taking up Bant from now on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Though ignorant of the truth behind the child and his parentage, she felt a natural maternal surge of affection for him, if for no other reason than due to who his uncle was.
Uncle being in quotation marks.
It is the first lesson one must learn, after all. Tell that to Gurion, Obi-Wan retorted with a snicker.
And to yourself when you were 12,
said a sudden voice from behind the three, which caused him to jump in surprise. Master Jin, Bant said, jumping to the highest of the three. Please do not do that.
I did nothing. It was you three who were too engrossed in the younglings to notice my arrival.
Qui-Gon remarked in his wry yet kindly manner.
Observing the younglings? Yes.
Siri replied, feigning indifference, even as her husband scolded his features.
And did one of you drag my Padawan here?
The gray Jedi wondered with a small smile that sent a wave of uncertainty to Obi-Wan's gut. For years he had believed his master could see through every aspect of him, every facet of his being. However, it was only in recent years, particularly after Tal's death, that he had found his master capable of failing to see certain of his Padawan's secrets or feelings. At the memory of Tal, Obi-Wan felt the second wave of emotion, and it was not one of uncertainty, but of intense grief. Tal would have loved Talon. She'd have found him amusing, adventurous, and so much like her. He thought every day that he saw his son, that he had free time away from...
I screwed up there.
When he had free time away from Siri or Qui-Gon, he hungered to see his son, to see what the boy had become. He had requested monthly reports without telling his master about the boy. And while the child had a mischief streak, he was always eager with a smile on his face, and kindly. Should I see more of Siri or myself in him? When I look at him, it almost feels like I see more of Master Tal than him. Not for nothing was he named after her. Well, you see, we were observing Obi-Wan's nephew, Bant explained, the Padawan of Kit Fisto, who was infamous for her fondness, like Yoda and Yaddle, of children. Her answer to the master she revered most earned her a curious look now from Jin.
Nephew?
Qui-Gon looked at Obi-Wan, who felt as though he were his son's age now, and caught with his hand in a jar of treats. Yes, master. I was curious, though. I know it is not our way to have connections with our families. I don't know. I wish to know him. Obi-Wan admitted, not able to directly lie to his master, yet not denying his friend's statement. He expected Qui-Gon to reject his words, to maybe see through everything, or to instruct him to keep his distance. I think I die yet. I think I died. Talon, though I have only infrequently been in his life these few years. Like Celia
These past few years.
These past few years. Like Celia and Qui-Gon is as necessary for me as my own breath. Obi-Wan thought. Instead, he briefly forgot, as always, just how full of warmth and goodness Qui-Gon could be despite his rigid adherence to certain facets of tradition.
Oh, really? Then by all means, I must see this infamous child.
Jin retorted, a smile on his bearded face as he took his own place to the right of Bant, his big frame allowing him to see over everyone's head.
Okay, that paragraph is weird. So forget the big part, the part about allowing him to see over everyone's heads. Yeah, that's weird.
Yes, first lesson that is to be when swinging the blade, yet not there yet, are we? Yoda has corrected young Talon with a smirk at the annoyed Wookiee. First lesson is that extension of you, part of your souls and of your own being, this blade is. Weapon it is not. Toy it is not. Art an extension of Jedi it is. As alive as its wielder it is.
Yes, Master.
Question you have, Initiate Kenobi? Yoda asked, seeing the child scrunch his nose in confusion. Yes, Master. I was wondering. I understand it being part of us, but why call it an it? If it is alive, then shouldn't it be a he or a she? Talon wondered, not realizing the whole philosophical kerfuffle he was bringing down upon the room, as Yoda blinked unsurprised yet pleased by the question.
Yeah, said another
child, as a third one burst in Shuriwook.
So, okay, do I do the Wookiee or do you? And we're not going to do the growl. We'll actually be offering the translation of his text because I put stars next to his text.
You may do it.
Mine's a he.
Griron growled out.
Because only a he could nearly cut me like that. No girl could hurt me.
Oh yeah, I could beat you, shouted a Twi'lek girl who threatened him, now with her own yellow blade, which reflected cutely with her skin of the same color. Calm yourselves and your minds, you will, of anger, Yoda said gently as his Gamma staff tapped on the ground as he wandered about before them. Now, excellent argument it is. If alive these blades are, why not call them he or she, or give them names? Because slow we adults are, mayhap name them, gender them we shall, because all living things feel, wish, and desire. Therefore, as our partner, deserving of such attention, are our lightsabers.
Mine's a girl,
shouted one, and so the cries rose as the observers now struggled to keep from busting their guts at this array of comedy and adorableness. However, one child now turned a little morose, as Yoda turned to the original cause of this cacophony of noise. Unhappy with this answer, are you? Or lonely, are you, young Kenobi? No, Master, I just think I would like a yellow one because this one is a he, Talon confessed. I like him, he feels right, but why not a yellow one? Why ask? Because yellow reminds me of the woman in my dreams, the golden-haired one who sang... The golden-haired one who sang to me, who smiled at me, alongside the other man, the Jedi in my dreams, who told me stories. Talon told him, unaware of how close he was to exposing the truth of what it was referring to. Suspicious that the boy spoke of his mother, whom Yoda believed to be Obi-Wan's sister-in-law, and demanded to simply be the one who brought him to the temple, he felt genuinely sorry for the child. While he could no longer remember his own mother, Yoda could sense the boy's loneliness, his longing, how these dreams had always been with him, filling him with love, with rightness. Why reject blue do you? Lonely you are, without yellow, yet how feel do you think will Blue at your rejection? Yoda inquired, cracking a joke whilst trying to also move the child's mind away from his family, to help him better forget them. It would be easier on him. That way he believed. Sad it is.
Okay, no, he believed. There, it kind of breaks. There was something else I was thinking, and I didn't fill out that part of the paragraph. So we'll continue with Yoda's next piece of dialogue.
Sad it is not to have a mother, yet strong you are. Keep you company forever Blue will, for the color of goodness it is. Fight the darkness in all of us, it does, just as yellow imbues us all with idealism, with morality, with light.
Now this is a reference to Jedi philosophy, color philosophy. Blue is basically righteousness. Yellow is essentially idealism, as all Jedi who wield yellow have had a tendency to be idealistic and naive at times, such as Rosh and Bastila. In turn, Blue was always these guys who were like, I'm going to go out and fight for what's right, being like paladins, essentially Obi-Wan, Anakin, and many other Jedi.
Moved, Talon nodded his head even as he felt a flash of guilt and shame at what he imagined the lightsaber to have felt. Hurriedly he apologized to it profusely, even as those behind a window either marveled at Yoda's wisdom or the child's precociousness, or just simply found amusement.
Quite precocious.
Qui-Gon noted, his manner serious as he studied the child in question, his mind filled with memories of his home world, of his own home world he had visited but once. He then thought of the one who had accompanied him there, of someone who had been more home to him than any parent could be, who had been in his very breath, in his very soul. Talon is quite adorable. Can you imagine when he is Obi-Wan's age? Band agreed as she gushed a little, her Mon Calamari eyes looking to the master, who froze in response to her words.
Talon?
Qui-Gon asked, his mind racing as he finally realized the child's given name. Yes, master. Apparently his is the male variant of the Coruscanti name Tal, Obi-Wan declared as matter-of-factly as he could, as he gazed anxiously at his master, both out of concern for him and for his little secret.
Tal.
Jin thought longingly. In all his years he hadn't met anyone else with the name, and yet he had always known it was a common one, at least in some parts. Yet how could he forget?
A coincidence, isn't it?
Silly said quietly, almost gravely, yet with a note of softness in her voice, that he holds...
All right. No.
Qui-Gon uttered, barely thinking now, even as his eyes now glued themselves to the small figure, learning the first katas of Shi-Cho, or Form 1.
It is no coincidence. It is the will of the Force.
He had to believe that. He had to believe that some part of Tal was reborn. It gave him comfort, filled him with hope, with peace to know that some part of her lived on. For the briefest of moments, he thought he saw that the child resembled more Silky than Obi-Wan or Tal, but brushed it from his mind. What mattered to him then was how the child embodied her spirit, yet was mixed with Obi-Wan's blood, if indirectly.
Is it a sign? A connection? A bond between the four of us? Oh, how I hope it is. She was as a mother to the boy, and if she was to ever be reborn, she'd have wanted this.
Qui-Gon thought, as he vowed to guard, to watch over, and to keep a close eye on a boy who shared his deceased love's name, even as he vowed to finally move on, after almost 4 years, to not take his beloved Padawan for granted, as well as to properly honor him in band.
Come, Padawan,
he said to Obi-Wan warmly, with a large hand on his right shoulder, who felt a surge of love when he saw something shift in his mentor, something click back into place that had dislodged years ago on New Absalom.
Now, New Absalom is where Tal died in the Jedi Apprentice series. It's a very tragic arc and a horrific moment in Star Wars history. We have another mission to the Mid-Rim. When we return, you will get the chance to observe Talon then as well.
As you wish, Obi-Wan said as he moved to follow, only to glance over his shoulder at Siki, who responded with a soft look and grin.
I'll let you know if he chops his foot off later.
She half-joked, and in that instance, all Obi-Wan could feel, despite his desire to remain rooted there with her, or to hold her hand, was the rightness of it all. He wished these times could last forever. He finally felt something shift in Qui-Gon after years of him grieving. He had Siki, he had Talon. What could go wrong, he wondered to himself.
4.
Talon had learnt his bladesmanship well enough. He was not the genius Obi-Wan or Force knew it Siki were. Yet he was making strides. He excelled more in the intellectual arts, such as problem-solving, math, science, and such. Yet he liked lightsaber classes with either Master Drolig or Yoda. It kept him away from meditation halls, which he hated with a passion. It also meant he could show his graceful side, a side of him that was becoming even ever more infrequent, especially since it was soon becoming renowned that he was going through a mini growth spurt, and thus had developed because he ran all over the place, a nasty habit of always tripping or falling at some master's feet. Like he just did. 3 sets of boots paused before him as the boy felt his face redden in pain, but more humiliation than anything else when he saw who it was. Masters Mace Windu and Qui-Gon Jinn, followed by Talon's uncle, Obi-Wan.
I'll do Windu. Be careful there, young one.
Windu said gently as he reached down with his dark hands to help the child back to his feet, even as Talon marveled at the beauty of his skin and at how close he was to the greatest Jedi in the galaxy. Many of the older students claimed him to be the most terrifying figure in history, yet Talon felt none of this. Rather, he was awed and honored.
Going somewhere, Talon?
Jin wondered in obvious amusement. Him Talon knew. He had met him several times in the past year, where Siki tended to correct him constantly, nag him, and occasionally find him when he had a nightmare to sing to him, much like the Dream Lady, as he called her, had. And where she had also started to show him several Form 5 moves, just as Obi-Wan gave him instruction in philosophy and history, or in ship designs as a means of training his memory. Jin had visited him when he was in meditation, or practicing the blade without his eyes, to give him kindly advice, or with the occasional snack in hand.
Now that sentence was a little weird. Anyways, go on.
Out of the masters, the wise Jin was Talon's second favorite. His favorite being, of course, Obi-Wan, who, though the others did not see as a master, he knew truly was. He was the best bladesman outside Siki and Windu. He knew because he had seen him best, his own master.
The man's own master.
He had seen him best, the man's own master. He was smarter than anyone, save maybe Siki, and kindlier than anyone. Yet why did I have to fall before him and Masters Windu and Jin like an oaf? He cursed, resisting the urge to practice a few choice words he had learned from Mares, the old nanny from the nursery who had taught him his favorite choice words years ago.
Now, Maris is a made-up character, and the oaf thing was a nod to Obi-Wan.
Just on my way to the Room of 1,000 Fountains, I'm going swimming and searching for special rocks with Initiate Ivekleba, Talon explained, in a hurry trying to hide the true reason he and the yellow-skinned Twi'lek were going swimming.
Ah, of course,
Jin remarked before adding sagely,
this wouldn't have anything to do with the morning, traditionally, being occupied with Yoda's meditation classes, now would it?
Maybe? Talon replied as though it were a question, shifting his feet, horrified to have been caught, even as he tried to make his eyes seem rounder or more adorable, as this always worked on Yaddle and on Padawan Sakura.
We all know who Sakura is. Ayla Sakura from Battlefront 2 and a few glimpses from the movie.
Smiling a little, if briefly, Windu patted him on the head and gave him a little push.
Go. Who knows if the fountains would have dried up by the time you arrive. And if you don't find those rocks, who will?
Thank you, Master. If you want, I could find you a rock, too, he offered before he stopped himself, kicking himself when he did.
I'll look forward to it, with greater joy than anything in my life.
Windu responded seriously, as though this truly were the most important thing anyone ever brought up to him. The child raced off as the adults watched him, with Qui-Gon remarking in a falsely plaintive voice,
Why don't I get rocks? Never mind the rock.
Windu retorted almost bitingly, as his manner changed from the coddling one he took with all the children to the harsh one he utilized with adults.
About that mission to the Beltrar system. This is off the record. There are suspicions of strange cult activity, which, whilst connected to the local Jedi cult, needs to be looked into and if need be arrested quietly, without the Senate's notice. Come along, Obi-Wan.
Qui-Gon ordered, even as he followed after his colleague, who, though were years younger than him, felt almost akin to his own elder in some key ways. Obi-Wan followed, having not missed the smile the boy gave him on the way to the fountains. He had lagged more out of memories of the Room of 1,000 Fountains, both ill and good, and prayed his son would have none in the likeness of the ill his father had endured there in the form of Brooke Chun. With the thought of Brooke, it brought back memories of Kad Chung, of his burning pale eyes, of his bitterness, of the guilt he had felt. Siri had done much to reassure him the one time he told her about it, but it had not cooled his feelings of pain and shame. The Chuns always brought onto him. Talon arrived, relieved the masters hadn't made him turn around and head back for meditation. Smiling as he arrived, his smile soon grew wider when he caught sight of his tiny Twi'lek friend, signaling him over, calling out his name with her musical voice that had moved her up a year in some of the artistic classes on Yaddle's recommendation.
Here, this is added because the art classes of the Jedi are rather akin to the monastic singing lessons that knights in the Middle Ages had to learn, and all the art classes such as visual arts and others that bushi or samurai had to learn in Japan. Oftentimes warrior classes had to learn artistic and religious ceremonial stuff and lessons in order to further enrich them. So with this in mind, George Lucas had hinted multiple times that the Jedi had to learn a lot of these sort of things, and even hinted that some of them even doubled over as opera singers. So with that in mind, we kind of folded that into this, with Yvette being obviously well trained as a bit of a, well, not yet, but she's getting taught to be essentially an opera singer.
Over here, Talon, I already found 3 red ones that gleam. She crowed in victory as she waved her tiny arms over her head. And the prettiest of them all, which is red, but gleams silver and gold. It looks like Ryloth. Grinning, he crossed the room in a few minutes, barely avoiding stumbling. He had only a handful of friends, with Yvette being his favorite thus far. She was perhaps not the best with the blade, but she was certainly a kindred spirit. Passing her, he leapt into the cool waters of the spring, enjoying the feeling of it even as he splashed his friend. For a time they forgot all about the rocks, as she shrieked in delight and irritation before she beat him down at their little game, then reminded him of the rocks. Then reminded him of the rocks. He set to work at his appointed task, looking for better rocks. With their backs to each other, he felt a stirring of joy and serenity enter him, as he heard her sing a little ditty from her homeworld of Ryloth in her clear and perfect voice. This moment of peace was shattered, though, when he saw her back, realized she was undefended, and reared back his arm to splash her. It just so happened she caught sight of his act from the corner of her eye, and Talon screwed up when she dropped to the ground, and he splashed a person just past her. That person was not in the water and was a few years older than the boy, and had been in the midst of impressing his two friends, one of whom was the impressionable Kreia. It wasn't a big wave of water. It was relatively tiny, yet with what little force power Talon could conjure forth, it did its job by splashing little more than the feet of one of them, and Kreia, who hated water due to his fur.
Okay, I'll do the bully's voice. You little monkey lizard! I was just about to show Kreia Master Jarlag's eighth kata perfectly, and you got me wet. Now, real quick, apologies if I sound like one of Linkara's characters from when he's reading characters such as, I think, Crazy Steve at one point.
Oh, boy.
No, wait, his Crazy Steve voice was better. Anyways, I sound like one of his bully characters that he occasionally does the reading of. Seriously, we're not going to plug his channel too much, but go check him out. He's fun.
Oops. Your form was splendid? The younger boy tried, attempting to smooth-talk his way out of the mess his mischief had landed him in.
Shut it!
Okay, I'm sorry. Won't happen again. Talon offered up with false cheer.
What are you even doing here? Shouldn't you be meditating?
Kreia retorted, wrinkling his nose at the stench of his wet furred feet. We're looking for pretty rocks and swimming. Would you like to join us? Yvette suggested, eager to make peace between them.
Us looking for rocks like this stupid one?
The Rodian retorted bitingly as he levitated with some concentration one of the rocks in Yvette's minuscule hand to his own outstretched palm. It was the prettiest of the lot, a bright red one that gleamed gold and silver when light bounced off of it, a rock brought in from the outer rim. Yvette squeaked in alarm as Talon rushed forward. Hey, give that back! It isn't yours, it's hers! But he was not yet strong enough or swift enough as he tripped over his own wet-cloaked legs, which earned him several laughs of derision.
Yeah, I'm sure scared now. Just don't trip over your hands next.
Talon, Yvette murmured worriedly behind him, as she moved to his side in the shallow water, while his face burned with humiliation and some small tears. He hadn't wanted to look the oath in front of his best friend. Give it back, he repeated firmly.
Why don't you go get it?
Was the reply as the Rodian initiate tossed it across the small pond, foolishly/clumsily, inadvertently starting another chain of bullying as it struck the blonde head of a seated girl from behind.
All right. Now, these two characters popped up in a Star Wars Saga Editions RP years ago when we were into that. And the characters got folded into the Kenobi timeline. And especially after their story started to interact with that of the Skywalkers and the Katarns. So from there, it kind of took on a life of its own. That said, the blonde character is one who was brought in as a kind of counterpoint of sorts to the character Dan made. Dan's character was from Tatooine, but the idea was that these two girls, their grandmothers were best friends and sworn sisters, and were both the daughters of moisture farmers. And these two grannies had sworn an oath of sisterhood, much in the style of Japan or Germanic or Frankish tribes or Scottish tribes might have. And then their daughters were best friends. And thus you had across 3 generations best friends, with these women having almost been put in the same crib and having a forspawn of sorts. As the idea of sworn oaths and forspawns, I think, were kind of a point of fascination on my part. And on Dan's part at the time. So here we go. Whoops! Oh, whoops. On my part. Ow!
The girl of 7 years of age burst out before she started crying like a baby, clutching at the back of her head, while the Rodian looked a little sorry for what he did.
Whoops!
He muttered, not that he had much time for such remarks, as the blonde human child's red-headed friend jumped up in rage when she found a rock. That's it! Who tossed the rock? I'm gonna criffin kill the mother criffin shoota! The redhead roared in pure rage as her eyes fell upon the newly risen Talon, the rocks in Yvek's hands, and the Rodian and his group, who had all paled. You dare! You did it, didn't you?
No, we didn't!
Greerian lied, unsuccessfully with the girl seeing through his deception, through the Force, though she was no great living, breathing lie detector like the Masters. She had some skills at it, just as the Masters did. You just lied, you little poodoos. You're all dead. You heard me cran.
Then take her to the medical bay rather than shouting at us.
The Rodian settled for bravado, being in the same year as the shrieking 7-year-old.
You tomboy of a monkey lizard.
What did you just call me? That's it.
Damn! Roar, roar!
Talon considered running, only to foolishly opt not to assume she was only after the bullies. But oh, how wrong he was. He discovered when she finished pounding the Rodian and his Togrutan friend, only to turn on him.
Wait, Malira!
The Togrutan cried out as she rained blow after blow upon him, until he cried more than poor Mikran, who had fled to find a medical bay and a healer for her bleeding head, which she found was fine, simply a small cut was all. Stop it! You've done enough! Calm down! It was an accident! Talon interfered unwisely, moved by the suffering of his peer and his 2 friends. You two, you're holding the rocks too! Malira finally noticed, furiously, her face red and panting from the exertion of beating up the 3 boys, whom were not nearly in as good shape as her. Were you on this? Were you in on this?
Yes, they were!
The Togrutan muttered anything to get the tomboy to stop beating him up. Drop the rocks, Yvek! Talon advised, paling a little as he caught sight of an evil greater than any Dark Lord. A pissed-off Malira Stardust, who looked almost as peeved as an Acklay, denied its meal.
An Acklay was a kind of spider monster of sorts that you saw in episode 2 that tried to devour and chop up Obi-Wan into itty-bitty pieces. Seriously, these are some of the most fearsome creatures in the Star Wars universe.
No! Yvek refused tearfully, as though it were a matter of life and death. These are ours. We found them. Criff, Talon grunted as he prepared for a beating, only for rescue to come at the most convenient of times, as a tall master appeared.
Okay, Syndraulic. You know what? I'm doing Windu, Jin. You take him.
Oi! Stardust, lay off there. What have we said about fighting? Syndraulic scolded sharply of one of his many pupils, earning him a glance from her. They started it. They hurt me crayon, she objected, for which they will be punished. But for now it is time for you to be punished after you have seen to your crying friend, Drolig reprimanded. Crive, I forgot. Me crayon, don't you worry. I'm on my way. Melira burst out as she raced off to find her best friend and surrogate twin sister, making ample demonstration also of her one-track mind.
That girl is either going to turn someday because someone looked at me crayon the wrong way, or she's going to become more ferocious a battle master than Master Windu.
One of the Padawans there commented with a shake of her head, as Drolig nodded his head a little. Let us hope for the latter. Now, as to you three, report to my quarters in 2 minutes for your punishment, he commanded of the three who hung their heads in shame as he turned to leave. Oh, and Kenobi, you'll report to me as well, given we have to find your place in this story. But I didn't do anything. I'll be the judge of that when I've heard all your stories.
Now, real quick, it's found out your place in the story. But Drolig is based off the sword instructor for the 3 prequel Star Wars movies, Nick something or other. But, well, the name is backwards, so Gillard, I think it is. And he would, like, I've seen him in a few interviews. He's brilliant. And he does know a lot about swordsmanship, fighting, and stunts. And he's also apparently a close personal friend of George Lucas. So Lucas has some pretty interesting connections. And Drolig mostly appeared in the Star Wars Episode 3 game and was an insert by George, I think, who wanted him in there to pay respect to his one friend, whom was always a good friend to him, unlike, say, Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese. And I'm not trying to bash those 2 directors. It's just, when you look at the behind-the-scenes stuff for Episode 4, you realize how much they tried to sabotage the movie when they realized how big it was going to be. And if you guys want, I'll make a separate video on that later. But the thing here is Drolig is a very important character to an extent. He's a major blade master and blade instructor, even though he's advanced in years. So we decided to include him in here because the game should be considered part of the EU, given all the other games are canon.
Good luck, Yvette whispered to Talon, who felt angry with Master Drolig for this mistake. He felt indignant, but tried to keep a brave face for his friend.
Oh, and by the way, Drolig is a master of Xian and Gemso, or Form 5. So, just to make it clear to everyone, what his philosophy and swordsmanship style is like. His swordsmanship style is basically the same as Seelie, and given that Seelie knew Xian Gemso, that includes also Anakin's style of Gemso.
Thanks, I'll be back soon, he replied, hurrying after Master Drolig, even as, behind him, he heard a shriek of horror and tears as he turned his head to find Gririon having knocked the rock from Yvette's hands and back into the water. Initiate Gririon, get over here at once. We will discuss this little petty vengeance at once. Drolig all but growled as the Wookiee looked about ready to run, even as Talon resisted the urge to go pummel him, as Melira just had, or to comfort poor weeping Yvette. Yet Drolig was already on that, as he grabbed the Wookiee roughly with one hand, forcing him after his friends, even as he turned his head to one of the Padawans. Padawan Muln, help her to her quarters and see about comforting her.
Yes, Master Drolig.
Jaren Muln assented as he moved to take the shaking, wailing 4-year-old into his arms.
Real quick, Jaren Muln is the best friend, or one of the best friends of Obi-Wan, and the greatest starfighter pilot in the galaxy. Seriously, this guy could dance circles around Anakin as a pilot. But ultimately, he's not going to have a great life because Star Wars, melancholy and sorrow and tragedy, often reign supreme in Star Wars, just as it does in Tolkien's Legendarium.
The lecture Talon received lasted only a half hour before he was instructed to attend meditation sessions. As to the Rodian to attend extra meditation sessions. As to the Rodian and Togrutan, they had to stay for another few minutes, where Kreia was punished with helping the droids clean the mess hall for a week, a lecture, and with extra meditation for a month. By the time Talon had left, the Wookiee was already in tears himself.
I had to do that. I had to laugh.
Hurrying back towards Evek's quarters, he was turned away to his frustration by Padawan Mon, who was just leaving to head for the hangar. Padawan Mon, move! He ordered as he moved to pass by him and into her quarters. But Jaren moved into his way, bent down and halted him physically with one hand to the arm.
Whoa there, Talon. Calm down. She just stopped crying.
But I have to see her.
Let her blow some steam off first.
Jaren advised, not at all unkindly.
I know it may be difficult, but I don't think she's in a mood to see anyone.
But, never mind. Talon grunted as he finally wiggled free and stepped into the room to find his friend curled up on her sleep couch with her back to the entrance of her quarters. Evek! Go away, Talon! Leave me alone! She cried out, hiccuping loudly, obviously not in complete control of her emotions at the moment. Hurt, Talon wanted to help her. He wanted to talk to her, to explain it wasn't his fault. But as he wondered about what he could do to make this all better, he happened upon an idea. She wanted pretty gems and rocks? Well, he'd go back and get the one that had been thrown at Mikran's head. The pretty one. I'll be back, Evek, he assured her as he moved to take off with Mum staring after him, as he left to find a land speeder to take him to the market square to buy the
Take him to the market square to buy the poor Twi'lek a small gift himself.
Okay. Talon arrived, and remembering where the stone may have fallen, he looked about in the grass, couldn't find it. Figuring it had fallen back in the water, he searched about for it. It wasn't there, in the shallow water. Full of panic, he scrambled to find it, only to fail and feel tears threaten to burst out when he thought of Evek hating him forever for not finding her precious rock. This is all Gririan's and Malira's fault, was his first thought, but then he remembered one of Yoda's lessons about never blaming another for the results of one's own actions and their consequences. This brought on more guilt and pain. Determined to right this wrong, he threw himself into searching the grass, the water, everywhere for the one rock. As he did so, he tried to collect all of the rocks that Evek had dropped, yet he couldn't see where it had fallen. After a while, the lights dimmed, people left, and Talon felt the weariness, the coldness, and dampness of the water all starting to get to him. His eyes blinked in exhaustion, even as he shivered.
Looking for something?
A kindly familiar voice called out. Talon looked up and up to find his gaze meet that of Jin's. He murmured, unsure of what to say, with his throat clogged with despair and emotion. Behind the master, as close as his shadow was, as always, Obi-Wan, who looked upon Talon with concern. Is something the matter, Talon? Have you been crying? The Padawan brushed past his master to clumsily offer up his sleeve for the child to blow his nose and wipe his eyes upon, as he shrugged it off to wrap around the child's tiny shoulders. Look at you. You're freezing. Warm up, Talon. I dropped Initiate Evekleba's rocks, he murmured. He mumbled, feeling warmed by Obi-Wan's cloak, finding comfort in it that was more than just simply physical in nature. There was a really pretty one that she liked. I think another initiate tossed it, and he explained the rest. By the time he finished, Obi-Wan was shaking his head. A child's fight, and that is all, Obi-Wan said, his words stinging Talon, who felt indignation at the casualness with which he dismissed Yvek's pain and the situation.
Obi-Wan, it is no simple matter.
Qui-Gon corrected harshly.
This may be a child's feud over a few rocks. However, it is as great in importance in life as the squabbling of a few petty senators. More, if you ask me.
The last part was grumbled out before he added a little more lightly.
Perhaps the young lad would care for our assistance in this great matter.
Yes, please, master, Talon agreed, his throat dry and his nose still sniffling a little. I'm sorry, Talon. I'll help you. Obi-Wan apologized sincerely. I did not mean to demean your feelings or the situation. It is fine, sir, Talon responded, not sure how to address the Padawan. He was no master or older.
He was no master.
He was no master or knight yet. Where did that put him in the pecking order of the order? The three of them searched about, with Talon providing a description of the said rock. The two older males waded through the water, barely past their boots, as Talon became more desperate. We're never going to find it, he worried after some time.
Remain calm, Talon. The rock could not have wandered off on its own.
Qui-Gon admonished delicately. Then how and why can't I find it? Because you're panicking, Obi-Wan stated. Once you stop panicking, you will find it. Yes, master, Talon replied, sucking in a big breath to drown out the ocean of anxiety pumping in his veins.
Good now. Good. Now trust your feelings, Talon, and you'll find it.
Qui-Gon said, bending down to look the initiate in the eye.
Breathe out your fears, and inhale. You'll be fine. Yvek will be fine. Now, close your eyes, and remember, where could the rock be? Where could it be in a cascade of stones, beneath the waves, hidden from the light?
Yes, master, the child answered as he closed his eyes and reached out, knowing what the master was saying to do, without putting it in so many words. The Force. Before it had felt like an echo or a wave of sensation, something that could only guide a blade and little else. Yet as he reached out, not trying to read someone, not trying to stop them, he tried to connect with the rocks, water, and grass.
Let go. Become one with it. As you reach out, not with eyes, but with that connects you to it. It to you, and unites, binds, and fills us all.
Qui-Gon said, his words coming from a distance as Talon did that, only to feel a kind of oncoming tide racing towards him. Suddenly, he felt filled with all things. He could feel the pulse of life within Qui-Gon. He lost himself in it. Without losing himself, he felt every blade of grass, every rock, every breeze from the air-conditional units, and every flow of water. He felt their individuality, their unity. He felt the stronger pulse of Obi-Wan, who had always felt like a part of him, one with him just as Siri was. Yet in that instant, he felt the rush of every individual rock. He not only knew them all, loved them all, but was them all, even as he was also himself. Opening his eyes to find Jin still looking at him, this time with an odd look in his eyes, something like regret, longing, and grandfatherly adoration.
Well, now, real quick, this scene is a nod to when Tal, Qui-Gon's love interest from the EU, first discovered how to use the Force at 4 years old, thereabouts, between 4 and 6, which is the same age Talon is when he discovers how to use the Force. So here, the idea is that Qui-Gon is very obviously reminiscing back to this memory almost 50 or 60 years ago and going, he's noticing the similarities between Tal and Talon. And this is hearkening back to the idea of that George Lucas brought into Star Wars, that history is cyclical, not linear. We're used to, in our post-American Revolution world, and I say that because, or for the French Revolution to an extent, but ever since the French and the American Revolutions, people have written history and talked about it as though it were linear. The Japanese, in turn, only started to think in this manner after the Meiji Revolution. So these revolutions were not just physical ones or governmental ones, but cultural and intellectual ones. But with Star Wars, you can't think in terms of linear history. You have to think in cyclical history. History and the world is a cycle, as George tries to teach us. So that history repeats itself because we're repeating things in a way. We might sink into tyranny, let's say, but then we might have a Roman Revolution or a glorious revolution wherein the monarchy is thrown down, so to speak. It's this sort of thing that George is often comments upon. So Tal, in a way, her story and her spirit is reborn into Talon, and, possibly also into later generations. So you have this cyclical history there that repeats itself over and over again in Star Wars. It's a fascinating philosophical movement that's been restarted to an extent in the 80s and 90s, and it's only been gaining steam. But George Lucas was almost at the forefront of it in the 70s because, he's one of the best read men on Earth right now and one of the smartest guys around.
I felt it. It was in me. I felt the force, but it wasn't like before. It was surging forth. It isn't just within you or I, but also in the rock. It was never like that before. Talon cheered the rock, forgotten, as he whooped in joy.
Now here the quote was almost a direct quote from Tal, where she said the same thing. Knew you had it in you, but was your rock amongst the ones you felt here, in the room of 1,000 fountains?
Qui-Gon asked.
Oh, and real quick, with Tal, she was on a boulder, not amongst rocks, but she felt all the little rocks and whatnot, so just had to interject that.
Talon felt his mood pop as he sagged. No, I know every other one, but that one wasn't there. Before Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan could offer condolences, someone cleared their throats from just behind Jin, near the doors, with a feigned cough. As Tachi entered the room with a superior smirk thrown in the boy's direction.
I happened to get a message from Jaren about this, and someone here has something to say.
From behind her, Mikran entered shyly, looking as though she was going to bolt any second then. Renowned as the finest sword wielder of her year, Mikran was also the shyest.
Here you go.
The blonde girl mumbled, stretching out her hand, her voice barely a whisper.
I picked it up when I left to see the healers. I didn't know it belonged to someone.
Nice work, Obi-Wan complimented Philly as he grinned at her.
Yeah, especially since you three were too busy playing in the water to properly search for the said rock Moan told me about.
Philly retorted, one-upping her rival/best friend/secret husband, as she always liked to do, and as he had come to enjoy.
Now, another comment. If anyone's thinking that Silly tends to one-up Obi-Wan in the style of certain characters like Captain Marvel does in the movie, it's not exactly like that. It's more like Riku and Sora. And there were nods when the stories with Celia were written to earlier stories like Leia, with Leia, characters like Leia. You had references to Q for Treason with the girl Kit, and it was more a gentle rivalry and whatnot. And there are quite a few scenes where Celia says she thinks Obi-Wan's better at something. So here, it's just she always has to throw out this bravado. She has the same personality as Riku from Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, minus the darkness. It's just part of her.
Thanks a bunch, Mikran. Talon told her, excitedly grabbing it from her as she yelped, in shock at being touched so suddenly. Thanks, Master Tachi.
Just Celia's fine,
she said warmly, ruffling his hair. Here you go, Micran. You can have one. Same as you, Siri, and one for you too as well. Talon declared, thanking all of them with some of the rocks from his own collection, without thought, before he hurried off, before coming to a halt. Oh, and Micran, you're now one of my friends, for life, same as Master Jin.
It would appear we are getting quite the collection of rocks and friends, are we not, Obi-Wan?
Qui-Gon remarked, as he made reference to Obi-Wan's 13th day of life gift.
This rock that he gave Obi-Wan on his 13th birthday is a Force-sensitive rock from Jin's homeworld. Jin was aware, but it's only implied that he was aware. He cracked a joke about it. But this rock was later passed down to Anakin, but Obi-Wan was to, I think in The Last of the Jedi, and it's implied, I think in a scene in Star Wars Episode 3, swipe it back. And it's implied that this rock played a decisive factor in why Obi-Wan was able to defeat Anakin to an extent, as it's a source of pure light. And it often works as a bit of a funnel for Obi-Wan's powers, where he throws power into it, and it sends light back at him, tripling his, well, maybe not tripling, but like multiplying his abilities considerably. I know it seems like a very, very small pathetic thing, but it's also a metaphor for, in a way, his bond with Qui-Gon Jinn. And it's also got biblical references, because, this is the stone upon which I will build my church to an extent. And the rock was passed down to Anakin, and Anakin misused it so that it returned to Obi-Wan. And, yeah, it's got a lot of importance in Star Wars.
The rock cheered up Yvette, who hugged Talon and wouldn't let him go for a few minutes. So grateful was she. Finally, the next day at the morning meal, Grurion joined him, with his fur a little wet as he dropped a handful of rocks in front of both of them, a sheepish look on his face.
Here you go,
Grurion murmured, clearly daunted as they stared at him.
Sorry for hurting you and knocking your rocks out of your hands, Yvette Lapa.
Yvette smiled in genuine gratitude and appreciation before she said with sincere warmth, Thanks, Grurion. You're forgiven. Why not sit with us? Let's be friends. In that slice of time, the Kenobi child was awed by his friend's forgiving nature. He asked himself if he could forgive a bully or anyone so easily. He knew himself. He knew his own anger, his own pettiness, and he resolved then to become more like Yvette, to become strong like her, to learn to forgive others. He would devote all his meditation time that day, and however long it took, even other days, to learning it, to master it. The Wookiee smiled in genuine pleasure as the three moved in to enjoy their meals. A blonde figure moved to sit down to Talon's. To Talon's right was Micran, who turned a little red at their questioning looks.
Hello.
Hello, Yvette said warmly. Aren't you Initiate Darklighter?
Yes, indeed. Micran is a Darklighter, which is the most common surname on Tatooine. Anyone who's familiar with Star Wars knows the Darklighter clan from Biggs Darklighter. So she is essentially a distant cousin, probably not at all fully related, because you've got to bear in mind there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Darklighters on Tatooine, almost all of whom are moisture farmers. This is not a family, but a clan. So she might be a cousin 8 to 13 times removed from Biggs. So that you have to ask yourself, what does that make them?
Absolutely nothing.
Sorry, Spaceballs. Probably the best Star Wars movie of all times.
Can't argue with that.
I'm joking. Anyways. Yes?
It was barely more than a breath.
Is it okay if I sit next to you three?
Sure. This time it was Talon, as someone nearby let out a cry. Not fair, Micran. You're supposed to always sit next to me. We pinky promised and everything. Melira burst out. The redhead looked completely irritated and red-faced, as her freckles stood out even more in that moment.
But you can still sit next to me,
Micran replied with much more confidence than when speaking to anyone else. No, it has to be just us. It is that or we can't be besties ever again, forever. Melira exploded unreasonably. "Bye, Dan," Talon muttered smarmily as his new female friend waved at her.
Goodbye, Melira.
"Fine, but give it another 2 minutes and you'll never see me again." And with that declaration, she was gone. A minute later, she was back, after noticing Drowlig enter the mess hall, so that she could pass on some food to Grurion and Talon. "Here, it isn't because I feel bad or anything about yesterday or anything. McRan, seriously, this is forever the last chance."
Okay.
Another humph later, and the blonde child leant over to whisper to them.
She'll be back in 5 minutes. She can never last.
"Why?" Yvette wondered.
Because we're best friends forever, no matter what.
McCran stated simply, as though she were making a statement about how water was wet, air is necessary for breath, and rock solid. And just as she said, Melira was back, sobbing and begging for their best friendship to be back on, and for there to be no last chances, and for her to sit to McCran's left, to McCran's right, hugging her and crying against her hair. This show of clear weakness in the meanest girl he knew made Talon wonder at the power of friendship, and he felt happy about it. He had begun that week with only one great friend. Now he had 3 of them. What else, as Master Yoda would ask, could the future possibly hold for them? That week it held meditation, cleaning duties, and lecture. But after that, the future was better and more assured for them.
All right. Sorry, we just had some minor technical difficulties just now, so I'll be taking up the narration for the remainder of this chapter. 5 years old had brought with it a great deal of concerns. Yvette had gotten a new rock pouch. About time. Sorry, that's me actually interrupting the reading. That girl should have had one in the crib.
She wouldn't have dropped her rocks in that case.
But she probably would have dropped her marbles. I couldn't resist that. Sorry. Grurion still followed some of the older initiates around in hopes of learning more about lightsaber techniques. And Talon now wondered about what was to come beyond a week ahead. This new level of thought process began when Yoda announced he no longer felt Talon should remain amongst the 4-year-olds and should be moved up a year for swordsmanship. This had swiftly ended in much the same manner, as he was soon bumped up another year when he outdid those not just a year older than him, but those 2 years older than he. Therefore, by the time he turned 5, he had been moved up to the same class as the likes of Mikran and Melira, as it was believed his was a rare talent. Then began the problems. While he exceeded those of his own age, and a year older than he, and with a bit of training, those 2 years older than himself, those 3 years older than him, with their more advanced techniques, strained his abilities and skills to the point of frustration. It was then that he had happened upon an idea to ask Celia to help him, but she was out on a 2-year-long mission, which would end 6 months later. Then he thought to ask her friend, Bant, where to find Celia when he couldn't find her in her quarters. It was directed to the newly arrived Obi-Wan 3 months later. Basically, 3 months before Celia's going to be back, Talon's getting this lesson from Obi-Wan. That paragraph was dumb. No need to nod that eagerly. His was a better form than most, especially since Obi-Wan had started to occasionally practice with him and show him how to do several katas of Form 4/Ataru, as they were doing at that moment.
Now, yes, you hold the blade before in an overhead position, so not like that, but a little higher by a fraction of a centimeter.
Obi-Wan was instructing, having stolen Talon from a small swimming session alone to show him the katas he had struggled with for some time since Obi-Wan had last been at the temple 7 months ago.
I am doing it,
Talon grunted.
Anger is illogical. You can do it, so no use letting emotion cloud your focus.
Obi-Wan admonished, as he had his son Hold the pose for 2 more minutes so that you could better study it, see the flaws, and improve it.
Yes, good. Like that. Now for the second kata.
Talon made a noise of annoyance as he blew out the air in his mouth. Dropping the pose, he asked as he wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, his eyes looking from the ground of the empty training hall to look his uncle in the eye.
Why am I learning Form 4 when I should be learning Form 1 instead? Because I thought your Form 1 form was already adequate after having you go through it, and it is normally Yoda or Prologue who teach the middle forms of Shi-Cho, rather than older pupils or knights.
Obi-Wan explained, having not toed outside regulation on this subject, as he felt it might draw unwanted attention to the boy if he knew too much of the more advanced forms of Shi-Cho.
I suppose if discretion was the goal, maybe I should have avoided teaching the philosophies and first kata or two of Ataru to him.
But he supposed some of the other younglings were already learning 1 or 2 things about Ataru, such as young Saraketo, who was learning some Niman and Ataru despite being only 7 years old herself.
But I need to improve Shi-Cho to catch up with Mikran and Melira and Fergus,
Talon replied, his mind still on the more advanced forms of his 2 female friends and new male one. Fergus Feld came from a local Coruscanti family, or so rumors went. Yet as quiet and cold as Fergus could be, Talon could see there was more to him. Tough and sturdy a fighter, he was the top of his age group, and rumor had it was already being considered by 3 knights or masters. He had made friends with Fergus via Adigalia, who it was said favored the young boy, and had happened to see them sparring one day. Admonishing Fergus for some of his form, she had advised him on his footwork, whilst correcting Talon's own style, seconds before the arrival of her Padawan, Celie, whom had been busy with her own saber practice elsewhere. Embarrassed as he was one of the top students and therefore rarely corrected, Fergus had reacted with some considerable depression, clearly unused to such criticism. To help him, Talon had invited him swimming, with him and Yvette, something he had expected the older student to turn down, but apparently the older boy had decided to do so. More, he confessed later, because he had been advised to do something other than study, meditate, or practice by Yoda, who felt him to be too stressed in recent months. Yet his shadow, just as Ferris Olin, a few years older than both of them, loomed over Talon, who felt as weak as a womp rat and as clumsy as a rancor. Wow, that's quite something in comparison to. But being moved up in years had caused him to think in his own childish way about the future, when he had observed the stressed manner of his senior friends and initiates.
Master Kenobi.
He began hesitantly.
Just Obi-Wan, Talon. I am no knight or master.
Obi-Wan answered easily.
I have a question. I know all the older students are beginning to look for masters, or are looked upon by those who have already passed the trials, but...
Here he paused again, unsure of himself, uncertain if he should ask, if it would make him appear greedy, selfish, or somehow expectant. He hadn't realized until recently, when one of the senior pupils had complained of how 3 Jedi, great ones at that, seemed to always favor Talon more than the others.
When I am of age, are you going to be my master?
As always, everything came out of Talon's mouth in a blurted-out fashion. It was his weakness, and something he was highly aware of. He was a gossip. He was loudmouthed. Once he thought something, he had to say it, and oftentimes forgot to guard his tongue, regardless how important or crucial the news was. Obi-Wan blinked in surprise. He had not expected the question, though he knew he should have. Celie and him had debated just this topic years ago, and had agreed to put it off until he was approximately 10 or 11. They had actually argued heatedly, screamed and shouted in the hotel room on the hang-in where Oda-Nobis had once stayed at years ago. Oda-Nobis is a bounty hunter character and a great villain from the Genaison Arbor trilogy of the Jedi Apprentice series. Great villain, great character. Seriously, read those stories. Both of them had been attached to the notion. Celie because she felt that with the Kenobi name, with Tal and with her years-long sabbaticals away with Adi, she was missing the crucial moments in Talon's life. I've lost so many moments. Obi-Wan, can't you understand this? I'm his mother. I've given him life, and yet I seem to do nothing but miss it. At every turn of the way, she had snapped, after he had pointed out how illogical she was behaving about this, after she had brought up the topic.
Yes, but bear in mind, I've not seen him in almost a year. You've been here for almost 3 months for almost 2 months without interruption.
He retaliated. A few weeks don't make up for almost 2 years, you fool. She ground out.
It is better than nothing. I'm his father, just as you're his mother. Why deny me him if you feel denied yourself? You're the one who handed him over since you chose that. Can't I choose what to do with him next?
Obi-Wan had suggested, thinking it only logical. His tone, though, made her seem as though she were being unreasonable at best and a completely unreasonable idiot at worst. Don't do that. Don't make me out to be some unreasonable shrew, Obi-Wan. And don't do that thing where you block your feelings out and come up with only logic. I'm your wife, not your Padawan whom you must educate in the simplest of things. Celie snapped, raising her voice to match his. Soon insults followed, then a week of silence, and then another argument, another month of missions and calm silence between them. Wow. That's not how you deal with your relationship problems. Only for them to meet up once more, with Obi-Wan eager to tell her about his mission, only to suddenly remember at that time their argument, and what he had called her, how he had treated her like a simple-minded fool, only to feel the fool himself. For that reason, because of his guilt, he had apologized profusely, only for his impulsive yet kindly spouse to respond in kind, in their secret meeting place. We'll set it aside for now, Celia decided, as they were gearing up for another fight, only for her to inhale deeply and take the high ground.
Fair enough, and if worse comes to worse, why not see who he wants without making a competition or a bitter battle between us?
Obi-Wan suggested what he hoped was a compromise. This resulted in her visibly mulling it over before she nodded her consent. Okay, but we leave it until the time comes, okay? She said, letting it fall before letting loose a small shriek of surprise and amusement as he pulled her into his arms, eager to put the worst fight of their lives behind them. Pulling himself from the memories of 2 years ago, the older Kenobi stared his boy in the eye and asked him, in what he hoped was a neutral tone.
Would you prefer it otherwise? No, actually, I'd love it, but only if you pass the trials and if Celie doesn't mind.
Talon replied, eagerly, with a large smile on his face, drawing the greatest smile he had ever seen on Obi-Wan's face. It brightened his entire being, his blue eyes especially, so that Talon felt his pleasure double, his joy peak at bringing such a grin to his hero.
That's good. I'm glad,
Obi-Wan stated before he raised an eyebrow.
Now, about those Form 1 katas, my future Padawan?
Being called Padawan encouraged Talon, pushed him forward, energized him, and gave him more hope as he struggled through it to please what he believed to be his surrogate father and uncle. Later, when running an errand for Yoda 6 months after this discussion, and after Celie had, with a sigh, resigned herself to not being his master, but insisted on teaching him a bit of her own katas, Talon discovered certain materials for Yoda's food in the kitchens. Dun, dun, dun! As he observed the sloppy, disgusting food being made, and the sorry excuse for a sauce, a thought occurred to him. Filled with mischief, he wondered if he could get away with it, even as he remembered how Malira had tried and failed to properly prank Yoda once, and was caught by Master Kun, with her joke turned upon her. Wow, Kun's a bit of a jerk there. Cackling as he raced back to his quarters, he soon had a stink bomb full of poodoo sauce, as Yvette called it, inside the little bomb. He knew Yoda's quarters to be unlocked, as most quarters were in the Jedi Temple. Few masters felt compelled to lock their doors. However, just as he arrived on that floor, leaving the turbolift to head there, he turned the corner. However, when he moved to open the door, throw it into the quarters, the ball failed to propel forward. Sorry, I misread that there. Propel forward as gravity dictated, with a...
Huh?
He looked up to find it levitating there, as behind him, stepping away from the opposite corner of the hallway, was a Sullustan master, the elderly Master Kyrus Brandir. Yes, this character is inspired by Chiron from Greek mythology, the trainer of heroes. Figured that if we needed a master, bring in Chiron from Greek mythology. Now, what have we here? He wondered, pursing his thick, drooping Celestin lips.
A gift for Master Yoda?
Talon responded innocently. Knowing this wasn't entirely a lie, Brandir, though, snickered, rather than grow annoyed enough to scold him. Yet, to the disappointment of the initiate, he didn't let the prank slide. Stink bomb, please! And gently, child! Pouting.
Yes, Master.
It was handed over as ordered. Now go to your quarters and think about what you did, and then you're going to go apologize to Master Yoda. A hung head and a nod later, he was gone. Kyrus looked about himself as the child did before throwing the bomb into the room. With a snicker, having claimed the prank for himself, he made a note to remember that boy for the future, having noticed him before. So, yes, Kyrus is just the worst in some ways.
And I think there are many masters who would be tempted to do that.
Yep. 6. Reach out. Good. Trust in the living force. It is the greatest aspect of the force, Qui-Gon instructed the class, having picked up for Yoda for the day, as he was preoccupied with a council meeting, while Obi-Wan was investigating an explosion in the lower city of Coruscant. Real quick, the explosion has something to do with a certain incident that takes place a few months before Episode 1. So, very important event, because Darth Maul is involved. Actually, Darth Maul and Obi-Wan nearly had like 3-4 run-ins. It's almost one of them walks around a corner, the other appears. And though some people may say, oh, that was lucky for Obi-Wan, no, I think that Maul would have lost that fight. Obi-Wan would have taken him. I'm in the minority, and I believe that Obi-Wan firmly defeated Maul. And because, like, that element of surprise jumping over Maul like that, Maul should never have fallen into that. But in that moment, Obi-Wan was filled with the power of the Force, to such an extent that even had Maul blocked the hit, he was done. Because Maul was exhausted, Obi-Wan was back at 100% and fresh. Because I've read the novel, Obi-Wan was, like, ready to go for another full 24 hours, it's stated, or something like that. And Maul's going, seriously, bro? Like,
the main advantage Maul had was Maul chose the arena of the battle.
Well, he also had more energy and power initially. It's just, in that moment, Obi-Wan's filled with the power of the light. And, yeah, like, Maul was exhausted because he had used everything up to defeat Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan briefly. But Obi-Wan, once he had cast aside his doubts, there was nothing Maul could do to fight him. Anyways, it was right after one of the history classes in the evening, where the students had learnt of the fearsome Exar Kun, the first Dark Lord of the Sith, not to be of the bloodline of the pure-blooded Sith Lords. Talon had discovered of late a certain passion for finding things, for discovery, and for history. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is a nod to Indiana Jones, real quick. As Dan and I are big fans of Indiana Jones. And it was our eldest brother's suggestion to kind of take Talon in this direction to some extent, because our eldest brother is the biggest Indiana Jones fan you'll ever find. He actually likes Indiana Jones more than he likes Star Wars, although he's a massive Star Wars geek. Anyways, because, as said before, this was a fanfic between the three of us. And, yeah. Sometimes he fancied himself amongst the Reclamation Jedi. The knowledge of the past fed into dreams of being a great hero, a great discoverer, or a great fighter. After all of which the likes of the Grand Master from 1200 years ago was Kaiku Ditar, or the legendary Mikal disciple, or the great odan-urr from millennia ago were. As he meditated, Talon felt the issues of the great philosophers and discoverers, the wise men of bygone days, fill his mind and heart. He was good at finding things, he thought. It had started with Yvek's rocks and finding the means to prank Yoda. He still didn't understand why the punishment was so harsh when he hadn't actually done it. Now he wished to find the unjust and bring them down. I wonder if it has something to do with that prank. I'm joking. To discover history as he was top of the class, a stark contrast to philosophy, which Mikran was best at now, or medical emergency classes where Melira had impressed the masters with her perfect knowledge of over 1,200 different beings' complete anatomy and number of bones, or Fergus's flawless bladesmanship. "It would appear someone is distracted," Qui-Gon noted dryly, as Talon opened his eyes to blush a little at finding the master's eyes upon him. "Clear your mind, young one."
Yes, master.
He assented, aware of his failure, as always, with meditation. It was difficult, as his mind was always full to the brim with questions, with curiosity, with wonder at the galaxy. After class that day, Talon approached Jin, just as he was finishing discussing Yvek's new rock. While the young Kenobi had proven himself remarkable in history, in politics, and in the sword, he had failed in meditation and medical areas, so that he had been kept at his age group's classes in those fields, amongst others.
Master, I want to ask something. When is Master Obi-Wan coming back, or Master Siki?
He asked Jin, who had just finished cooing over Yvek's proud discovery before she shot a warm glance in Talon's direction. This just before rushing out to go find Gurion, who was busy with Master Dralik. In the past year, the Wookiee had not just proven himself in certain physical aspects. He was clearly favored now, despite the bumpy introduction to Sindralig. And was even favored by the great Wookiee Master Frere. His physical prowess and precocious cunning for trouble as a bully had been redirected, and with his obvious knack for meditation, for wisdom, he was now considered the premier student of their age group. This meant he was now learning Form 5, Xian, to properly apply his strength, which would only grow greater with age. "He should be back soon. He is simply on yet another solo mission, just as Celia is off dealing with yet another pirate group," Qui-Gon replied warmly, his smile and strong gaze filling the child with the impression he was special to Jin. It wasn't as though Qui-Gon treated the others badly. He treated them much the same way, particularly Yvek, Mikran, or Fersolin. However, at times, Talon could feel a specialness, a tie between them, some sort of connection, some sort of link between them that the Master felt. In the past few years, he had noticed how Jin had kept an eye on his progress, encouraged him, and seemed to always find time to watch him. Yet it was as though he was also looking at someone else, someone other than Talon. This confused him, yet it didn't discourage the bond between them. It only enhanced it. Or so he felt, and since that day in the pond, he had applied every word Master Jin told him, knowing it was always true, and that he had to trust his feelings and instincts more than anything else. He had also begun to realize his belief in the living force was growing. It was what tied him to people, to Celia, to Obi-Wan, to Qui-Gon, to Yvek, to all. It meant everything to him, these bonds, these connections.
Well, Master Siki and him promised to take me to the market area,
Talon informed him, cheerily, trying to hide the real reason they had taking him and occasionally his friends there. Talon had begun to keep an eye on temple security, on the individual guards' shifts, on the warning sensory lights, and on how far it was to the square. He had also begun to keep an eye on how to get to the Senate, as he wanted to know just how the galaxy was run, why everyone seemed to hate the Senate, and thus to understand why the Jedi served it. "Ah, I see. And this wouldn't have anything to do with that incident 9 months ago, when you were caught sneaking off with Initiates Gurion and Yveklaba, now would it?" Jin wondered lightly, a touch of humor in his voice as he smirked at the child. Talon stuttered, having been certain he could fool the seemingly all-knowing Master. As if. He had tricked Master Mundi once, Pato and Sakura too, and even Madame knew, by sneaking off with a copy of The Legendary Million Tales of Wonder by Grandmaster Datar, which he still had, with the archives, in any case, possessing about 80 other copies. That's a lot. "I see it does."
It has been some time since I saw them, is all.
He replied. It wasn't a total lie, he told himself. It was just not the whole truth. Deception is the first path towards fear and darkness, Jin lectured him sternly, applying one of Yoda's old proverbs, which the younglings learnt at 2 years old.
Yes, master.
A shamefaced answer. Okay, real quick. 2 years of age should have been the exact line there, not 2 years old. In Star Wars, they say 2 years of age, or 30 years of age, not years old. What was I thinking? I was actually more hopped up and high on Star Wars trivia and whatnot back then. Probably I was thinking, I'll just note this down and later I'll correct it. And I never got around to it. Like I said, this fanfic basically got shunted aside to, I don't know, like the back of the laptop. And was forgotten for years on end. And I never really thought to do anything with it for a long time, because by the time I thought of writing again, I decided, you know what, I want to write my own stories, not someone else's. Because, I mean, no offense, when George Lucas sold Star Wars, because one of my dreams was to become one of those EU authors, when he sold Star Wars, it did kind of crush that hope. So I just shunted it aside and said, whatever. But here we are with this video fanfic series. Well, I may not be either of them yet. Perhaps you and your class could come with me for some muja cakes there, as I just so happened to be on my way there, Qui-Gon remarked with a particular twinkle in his eyes. This was how the 6 to 9 year olds, those who were 6 to 9 years of age, found themselves alongside several nannies, 2 knights, 4 Padawans, and 1 master in the market square. As the excursion involved danger, fun, and private time for the young Kenobi, it had become... this sentence was weird. Originally, the excursion involved danger, fun, and private time for the Kenobi, for the young Kenobi. It had since become a public outing. There, I corrected it. Not that he minded, as he devoured some iced muja cream. Now, the idea is to... Star Wars does not have ice cream, but I decided to insert it in. Seated beside Master Qui-Gon, who kept a close eye upon some of the children playing together. I remember coming here once, when I was but a little older than yourself, Talon, Qui-Gon said suddenly, as the sun began to dip a little, a reflective side to his character showing that the child had never seen before, now taking hold of the old man.
Did you play too?
Yes, but only with one friend, Qui-Gon replied heavily. She and I came here often, in later years, usually to escape my master, and usually to feel the company of all the beings here, as we both loved people and the sensation of them around us. It eased us.
Was she a Jedi too, Master?
Talon asked, only half his mind on the conversation, as he tried and failed to imagine Master Jin without a beard, and being as young as himself. He failed. In his view, Jin was born with that beard, just as Yvek had joked that Gurion was born covered with fur. Yeah, honestly, I could understand a kid thinking he was born with that beard. It's a magnificent beard.
Yes. I mean,
Liam Neeson's one of those guys who can pull off a beard no matter what. Him and Ewan McGregor. Actually, Ewan McGregor does not look as good without one. He looks better with a beard.
Yeah, I can't imagine either of them without beards now.
All right, so it's decided. Scotland and the rest of the UK and US must pass laws forbidding Ewan McGregor from shaving from now on. He's allowed to trim his beard but not shave it. You could all start a petition. We're going to have to put it in the comment section. Let Samwise know we want a petition, Storyfire petition. We're going to change the laws just regarding Ewan McGregor. Maybe Liam Neeson as well, because he's, as you pointed out, he looks great. With it, we should conclude them as a pair in that regard. He also questioned and failed to understand how anyone could want to escape their masters. This made him wonder who this master was. He had once thought it was Dooku. Yes, Dooku's first name is Dooku, and his surname is Dooku, because he comes from the family known as Dooku. At least originally, like 20 years ago, I think that was the piece of lore, which just had people going, what the?
His parents hated him.
They must have.
They were prophets. They knew he would go awry.
Yeah. Or so the stories went. Talon refused to believe them. For how could someone like him train the nicest Jedi in the universe? To his mind, the one time he had... Okay, the nicest Jedi in the universe to his mind. There. I misread it there for a minute. The one time he had met Dooku, he had felt terror grip his gut. He had fled alongside Mikran that day, unable to stand the old man's icy eyes that had made him think of the one time he had seen a picture of Darth Varian or Darth Ruin from the new Sith Wars. Yes, her name was Tall, Qui-Gon murmured quietly. This caught Talon's attention as he gave it some thought. She had gold-flecked eyes and laughed, but rarely, yet gave freely, often to Obi-Wan.
So I share her name?
Talon wondered, confused, as he questioned if he had been named after her, only to reject the idea. He had been given over to the Jedi, and suddenly he felt sad as he missed the Dream Lady, who sang to him, as well as the Jedi of his dreams. He missed them, as surely as Qui-Gon Jinn missed his friend, and Talon was given to wonder if someday he would still feel so lonely, as surely as Qui-Gon now does.
A strange coincidence. Maybe it was
Coincidence.
A strange coincidence. Maybe it was the Force then.
Yes, maybe, Qui-Gon retorted thoughtfully, still lost in his memories of another time and another place.
Did she die?
Yes, to a monster. This remark was said so coldly, the boy shivered. It was a long time before Qui-Gon spoke again. He would do so only after Talon had piped up, patting Jinn's wrist, for it was all he could reach, in a comforting gesture he had seen Yvette use on him, and similar to the arm rub Malira Mikran shared when sad or lonely or hurt.
I'd have liked to have met her master.
He spoke up, then tried to remember something Yoda had taught him years ago.
But nobody ever really dies, if you remembered them, right? Because they still live on in the Force, and in you and your thoughts, right, Master?
He smiled up at the old man, who returned it with a genuine grin back, his eyes shining with what seemed like tears for a moment. But doubt clouded Talon's heart, so that he assumed he was seeing things. Why would a living legend and hero cry or have tears in their eyes? There was no way Master Qui-Gon Jinn had ever cried in his life. He was too strong for pain or mortality. Oh boy. Now, Tall in the Jedi Apprentice novels died on New Absalom in a very grim couple of novels. It's just a really tragic reading. Tall is a great character. So here, this part of this chapter was just a big tribute to her great character. As you can see, we also invented some lore and whatnot, because you gotta invent some stuff for the new Sith Wars, for example, because there's so little that's known. You gotta invent some stuff here and there. And we took some liberties. We're not gonna have some of the lore take priority over other things. We're just, like, for example, the Book of Master Tatar, obviously we invented that. And the idea is just, that's like the Grimm's fairy tales. Like, Star Wars would have their own sort of stuff like that. And it's not meant to replace lore so much as add to it. But let us know in the comment section if you want more of this sort of thing or less. And we'll kind of lean in. But we're not going to replace any pre-existing lore. No, we will never try to do that. Because the pre-existing lore from like 76 up to 2008, which is pretty much the golden age, the George Lucas age of Star Wars, must take precedence over all other lore in terms of Star Wars, as far as we're concerned. You are kind. You are inquisitive and so much akin to her, it is a wonder. I predict that you will someday make a great Jedi Knight, as surely as she did. I look forward to the day when you are chosen as some lucky Master or Knight's Padawan, Jinn said with a seriousness that filled Talon with pride, so he puffed up his chest a little.
Yeah, when I'm Master Obi-Wan's Padawan,
he boasted, unable to keep it secret from Obi-Wan's master, his little ego bursting with joy, and the image that sprung to his mind. One of him, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon, fighting side by side or going on missions, the three of them. Maybe even four, if Qui-Gon took Yvette as his Padawan, as she hoped he someday would. Obi-Wan? Really now?
Yes, we promised, sir.
It would appear that I lost my chance to train you already, and here I had hoped to take you for my own Padawan in time, to train every Kenobi who ever came to the Order. Well, there goes that dream, Qui-Gon lamented, causing Talon's hurt... Okay, no, this sentence is kind of broken up. Talon's heart to shudder and tighten with guilt at the horrifying thought of causing Jin any sort of pain.
No, Master, I'm so sorry. I would never hurt you and would be honored, however. I already promised.
Talon apologized profusely, only to scowl at the smile he saw in Qui-Gon's face.
You tricked me.
Indeed I did, Jin affirmed.
But that goes against the code.
No, deception and fear does, but never trickery or mischief, Qui-Gon retorted, with a hand on his head, as the child pouted. Now, why not return to the temple? It is high time you begin your evening meditation. Talon groaned, to the amusement of the master, but as they walked up the steps of the temple a few minutes later, he grasped Jin's hand in his own. He said to the tall man,
Master, I may not become your Padawan, but you will always be the greatest master of the Order, I think.
Qui-Gon smiled. Better than Yoda?
Yes, though don't tell him I said that.
We'll make it our promise, young Talon. In time, though, you'll become a better master than I. If Obi-Wan or Silly don't make it come true, then I swear to you, I will. Obi-Wan's mentor swore as he pinched the boy's cheek with one hand, before he used it to pick up a shrieking and joy-filled Melira. Not to mention, you could never hurt or disappoint me, Talon. Never forget that. And never forget that Celia and Obi-Wan will always feel the same for you. It was a few weeks later. Sorry about that. I misread. It was a few weeks later that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan left for Naboo. When they returned, every single one of Talon's dreams, beliefs, and philosophies would be shattered. Further, this was when he considered the early part of his childhood over. And for all those thinking he's going to replace Anakin as Obi-Wan's Padawan, no, we can't do that because the lore is fixed in that regard. Qui-Gon will still perish, and Talon loses his grandpa figure. But, in turn, because Ferris Olin is taken as Celia's Padawan, he does not become Celia's Padawan either. I will be giving that spoiler alert, that spoiler to you guys. So, now, Talon's in for the fight for his life to become a Jedi, because suddenly all three of his options are swept away from him. So, yeah, basically, in some ways... Now, Obi-Wan would never have wanted his son to go through the same sort of traumas that he did in his struggle to become a Jedi Padawan learner. But now his son's about to undergo some of that trauma. Some, not entirely. Talon's situation will probably resemble more Celia's in some ways, though. So, yeah. That said, Talon and Anakin will not be having the best intro to each other. No, duh. But in time, like I said before, Talon basically becomes Anakin's little hero, well, a hero worshipping character towards Anakin, and like will follow him around everywhere. The idea is that Talon is not a Gary Stu or Mary Sue or whatever. He's a very flawed character, and rather than he's gonna be, if anything, Pippin, not Sam, Mary, or Frodo. You know what I mean? To Anakin's kind of Mary or Frodo to an extent. Yeah, I know Anakin turns to the dark side, but it's like Talon mostly falls around Anakin and just follows in his shadow. He's going to have his own belief systems, but he's still going to be a bit of a follower towards Anakin. Oftentimes just agreeing almost blindly with Anakin, because Anakin essentially assumes a role of older brother to him. In turn, Talon, I will give another spoiler, will come to believe that that though Padme or Obi-Wan could not have saved Anakin from the dark side, he himself could. No. So Talon's going to be in for quite the tough life. It's not going to be a fun time for him. Because Star Wars.
Promises and oaths are always
bound up in tragedy. Now, the oath that one of his parents would take him up as a Padawan we're going to approach that. That has not been discarded or neglected. Too many people swore oaths to become Talon's master, so that the situation is going to be very, very complicated later. But don't worry about that just yet. We have like 10 to 11 chapters until the how should I describe it? Until the situation will come up again. Because by the time of episode 2, Talon is still a Padawan learner. Because he's 3 years younger than Anakin. Anakin is 20 years old in episode 2. Because it's 11 years after episode 1. And so, you have Talon who's going to be about 17 at that time. So, as you can see, around the time of episode 3, like Anakin, he'll have passed the trials. The trouble is, what will he do after that? That said, as to Fergus Feld, the one friend of Talon's earlier in this chapter that we didn't really get into as much, we'll be getting into him more, almost out of all the friends, I think, except for maybe Malira. Fergus was going to assume a very important role, but he's based off of Sturm Brightblade. So the thing is, Fergus is also a awareness character, because the thing is, Qui-Gon Jinn was abused as psychologically and verbally as a Padawan learner by Dooku. It's very obvious when you read Legacy of the Jedi. Dooku was an abusive master. Him and Qui-Gon hated each other. When Dooku says, "I loved your master," and whatnot, to Obi-Wan in episode 2, that's bullshit. That's a lie. Dooku's lying through his teeth. And the thing is, in the episode 2 novel, Obi-Wan senses that Dooku's lying through his teeth and is like, yeah, right. Qui-Gon Jinn didn't like you. He hated your guts. And, at least in the novel, and he says something to that effect, and you have Dooku. Well, can't blame a guy for trying. Dooku's like, well, come on. Like, you can't fault a guy for lying every now and then. Like, Dooku's a liar by nature. And so I don't know why there are fans who are like, oh yeah, they totes loved each other, Qui-Gon and Dooku. No. Dooku is someone who almost, how should I put it? It's implied in the Legacy of the Jedi novel, a great novel, that Dooku actually rejoiced when Qui-Gon Jinn died, to an extent, because it proved some of his beliefs right about Qui-Gon. Because he had told Qui-Gon Jinn at one point, you're a failure, and that's all you'll ever be. And so when Qui-Gon died the way he did, it kind of confirmed to Dooku, yes, he was a failure. I was right. In this weird, distorted way for Dooku. Like, Dooku was someone who lived in his own world, in his own head too much. Fergus is someone who will not have Dooku for a master, don't worry. But he has someone just as bad, cold, physically and verbally abusive. But because there's no protection from your master, because Yoda doesn't believe in protecting some Jedi from their masters, like, Obi-Wan was verbally abusive to Anakin. In episode 2, it's very obvious Anakin is suffering from verbal abuse. And Obi-Wan's not a great parent there for a bit. And this is part of why Anakin kind of developed psychological problems, because Palpatine is putting his fingers into that pie while Obi-Wan is abusing Anakin. Over the course of the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan lost that side of him and became a better parent and atoned for it. Fergus does not get that kind of closure. He has a master who hates him, who liked him initially, but more like a trophy. But then his master slowly comes to hate him and regard him as a failure and a flop. And Fergus kind of becomes a melancholic, depressed individual who, yes, he's sworn to the light, but he's a man who never quite... he's someone who never quite gets over the abuse. He's a bit like Sturm Brightblade. So that his is a lonely life, and one filled with very little hope or dreams for the future. And one who he didn't like his master, but he could not report him. So at 17, he had to rush into the trials before he was almost ready to become an adult, because otherwise he had another 2-3 years of abuse to suffer through. He passed the trials at 17, just as Qui-Gon Jinn had. But the difference is, where Jinn overcame those losses and that trauma at the hand of Dooku's hands, Fergus didn't entirely succeed. And Fergus is someone who he starts off a very traditional Jedi, believing in the honor and the code, but it becomes shackles for him, weighing him down and destroying him in a way. And he is bonded to Yoda in a way, like they do have a friendship. But the thing is, he's going to show the good side of Yoda to an extent, because Yoda does have a bad side to him, and Fergus would show the better side of Yoda, and that Yoda's like, I kind of regret letting that Fergus's master should never have taken Fergus as a Padawan. That should never have been allowed. I should have stopped it. I don't know how, but I should have found a way. And the thing is, though, Fergus sees it as, well, there was no way to stop it. I wanted the most skilled master I could find. I got that. It's just, this was my destiny. And there's that kind of depressed resignation. So you've got this very, very defeatist philosophy mixed with, well, yeah, it's just, Fergus is a very fatalistic, honor-based character. And he doesn't exactly believe in hope. So a lot of Jedi kind of look at him with a bit of pity or uncertainty, but he's ironclad. Like, you want him on a mission, will he complete the mission? Yeah. He's competent. He's
the ideal of what many see the Jedi as.
Yes. But he's a tragedy, in a way. On the outside, he's made of granite. He will never crack, never bend, never break, and never falter. But on the inside, he's broken. And he's a total opposite to, say, Qui-Gon Jinn or Obi-Wan in a way. He did cut himself off from other people, like Dooku did. But the difference is, it's not... Dooku gave into anger and hatred against the galaxy. Fergus just simply holds 3-4 walls between himself and them. And not out of hatred, but it's more just distance.
So, an emotional self-defense mechanism.
Yeah.
To protect himself.
So where Mikran's going to overcome her shyness and become a quiet, if kindly, young woman who longs to be a school teacher or something, Melira's going to become this medical officer and this incredibly competent swordswoman. Gurion's going to become a great warrior who's aggressive, a little angry at the galaxy, but also confident, aggressive, determined. He's a bit like Ollie Queen, I guess you could say, from DC Comics, to an extent, Gabion and everything. Talon becomes a bit like Nightwing. Fergus becomes like Sturm Brightblade, so that only maybe Talon and maybe Yoda could kind of reach him. Other Jedi will find him at times difficult to reach because he cuts himself off from them a lot. Even from other Jedi, he's cut off emotionally. He's a damaged man. And the hope was to make him into a bit of a tragic character and figure. Weirdly, the idea was that he'd also bond quite strongly with the clones because they're cut off from the rest of the galaxy. And he kind of connects with that. So he can't connect with civilians. He has no basis for understanding them emotionally. He can understand them intellectually, but he's terrible at a funeral, for example. But he bonds with the clones because he gets them. The clones, though, are different from the Clone Wars cartoon. In the original novels, they were injected eventually with a serum to slow their rapid aging so that, you could have these soldiers for as long as you can. Contrary to the Karen Traviss shit novels, which were the worst books I've ever seen. Don't read them. They're terrible. And they contradict all Star Wars lore. Because you got to bear in mind, Karen Traviss wanted her own lore superimposed over George Lucas's. No. George Lucas lore comes before everything else. Period. So, we're going with Lucas lore. The clones were not they were not rapidly aging by the time of, let's say, even Episode 3. By then, they had been injected with a serum because the Jedi and the Republic decided, if we have our soldiers, if this war is going to last 20 years, they're going to be aged up by 40 years. They're going to be 60. What point will they be what purpose will they have then? So, instead of being 26 years old by the time of Episode 3, the clones were more like 22 or 23. So, biologically, they were already 20, but then, so Fergus forms a bit of a bond with his legion because he kind of gets them. He's not really a peacekeeper at his core. He's a warrior. So, and they're soldiers. So warrior and soldier kind of intermingle and mix together quite nicely, psychologically. And so you've got these different characters who approach the Jedi path in a very different way. Gurion's also a warrior, but Gurion sees it as his greatest loyalty is to his friends. Fergus, it's to the ideals of the Jedi. But Fergus is also someone who's like, the Republic is damned, and it will bring us down someday. But I'm going to keep serving it. It's like a Norse warrior, like, I'll keep serving, even though I know this is leading to my doom. Why? Who cares? It's like, it's about honor and your duty to, duty is everything, as is honor. Talon is someone who's also very obsessed with honor, but in a different way, in a healthier way than Fergus. Fergus was just going to be the most psychologically unhealthy character in the entire fic, to such an extent that, like I said, it kind of destroys him a little. But he was going to be an inspirational, great character, I think. Like Sturm. Oops. So I hope you guys don't mind us kind of getting into each of the characters, explaining things a little about where they're headed. I just figure that you guys out to be given... I know it might remove some spoilers. It won't remove... We're not going to spoil everything, but like the idea is we do need to give you guys an incentive to continue and a good idea of the mold into which we are casting each character and what kind of individuals they're going to be. And how, like we looked at Malira and we were obviously thinking, I think Mary Jane Watson or something, right?
Yes.
Someone who's that redhead with her redhead temper and everything. Because Mary Jane Watson Parker is such a great character. Mikran was going to start off a bit like Hinata. I'm not a big Naruto fan, but the idea was to kind of spoof Hinata in that, at 4 or 6 years old, she's like that, or 7 years old or whatever. But she's going to become a quiet, strong, steely individual who's, I guess, more like Plo Koon or something, or Brol in some ways. So she's not at all following that. Not exactly in the boastful way that Brol is, but just the strength and the vigor and the confidence, even as she's becoming more and more feminine. I think psychologically, because I was into a bit of Russian literature at the time, Mikran seems to resemble some Russian literary heroines as well. Blonde, statuesque, voluptuous, but ultimately rather almost a Mother Mary type figure. Like very maternal, very feminine, having a great deal of dislike for violence. Yes, she's a skilled swordswoman, but she doesn't become as strong as she could be because she's not into that. She's more into feminine arts and redeeming the galaxy, I guess you could say, rather than fighting for it.
Fighting is the last resort to her.
Yes. Who else of all the friends? Yvette Laba, we'll get to... Well, she's got her own path. We'll get to that. There's a lot of spoilers there if we were to spoil everything. I think we've spoiled enough. And a lot of these friends, we're going to have their own arcs and journeys just to enrich the Clone Wars and add to the conflict. And we were also going to invent a lot on the CIS side because our goal was to also fill up the CIS side with officers and generals because we were hopped up on Gundam versus Zeta Gundam at the time with how that game really filled out all the sides and showed that there were heroes and villains on all sides. And Star Wars was supposed to have that in the Clone Wars, but they never got around. Only in a few novels did they get around to filling out the CIS side of heroes, and some of them were supposed to be heroic and tricked by Dooku. There were light side Jedi who apparently chose to fight for Dooku because they hated the Republic and they wanted reforms and they couldn't see it happening under Yoda. That said, a lot of these Jedi did not turn to the dark side like Quinlan Vos, whom I hate as a character. So if you like him, sorry, but fuck him. Sorry, this is the only time I'll F-bomb. Because I hate Quinlan Vos as a character. I don't get the character. He's a Mary Sue. And we were going to have him destroyed to Order 66. That's the one thing I'll disagree with some fans on. Oh yeah, he should totally bite the bullet to Order 66. There's no way he would survive because his clone legion hated him because he had betrayed them too many times.
He was the only Jedi that the clones looked forward to killing.
Yeah, whereas his former Padawan, whom I will remind people, he had, I think, pimped out a few times and violated several times. Ila Sakura was loved by the clones. And yes, it is strongly implied he had taken his own Padawan, I think when she was a teen, by force at one point. His memories had been wiped, but given that seemed to happen to him every Tuesday, I'm a little suspicious of everything with his story because he just committed so many wrongs that you basically had both sides. Even Dooku, like, wow, bro, that's a new low. Like, I'm just saying because Dooku regarded him with scorn at one point. All the Jedi regarded him with horror, I think, because, well, how often does he fall to the dark side? And yet, for some odd reason, the Jedi always look the other way. I never understood that. There should be consequences to character actions.
And people like both Yoda and Mace Windu
would not forgive him after, like, I think, fourth time. No, by even the second by the first time he turned, they wouldn't forgive him. The fact that he turned like 4 or 5 times is like, in the comics, it's like, wow, okay, stop. This is stretching, the extremes of disbelievability. So, yeah, Quinlan Vos, we're not really going to carry around in this fic because, what the heck? That said, we are going to introduce a whole cast of characters, mostly to enrich Anakin and to give us different insight into Anakin Skywalker's character. Because Anakin is really at the center of all this. Because I hate it when fanfic authors or EU authors don't put Obi-Wan and Anakin at the center of prequel stories, or Luke and Kyle Katarn at the center of original era stories. And they don't do these full journeys in the style of Luke, Kyle, or Jaden Core, like what those games and novels surrounding these characters did originally. So anyways, tell us what you think in the comments section down below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button. And if you want, tip us with some blaze. We always appreciate that. And may the Force be with you always, Padawans.